Hello and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 93, Monday, August 28th, 2023.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined as always by the Oliver to my Dodger, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Thanks, Courtney, and hello, listeners. It is time for us to wrap up this summer series, and we are so thankful for all of you sticking with us over these last 4 novels.
Yeah, over the past 3 months, we've celebrated British literature and its subsequent Disney adaptations for our annual summer series. We started in May with Peter Pan, The Wind in the Willows in June, and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass in July. Today we are closing out the series and have 2 special guests joining us for our discussion of Oliver Twist. First up, it is 2-time guest of the show, my husband, Dr. Douglas Kern. Doug joined us last on episode 67 to discuss Disney and Dali, Architects of the Imagination, and previously joined our 2020 Summer Cinema series on episode 44 for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Doug is currently a professor of English at Valencia College, and he's joining us today with his knowledge of media and foundation of a PhD in theater, film, and television from the University of York. Welcome back, Doug.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Emily and Courtney, for having me back.
Of course, and also joining us, last but not least, is Doug's good pal, Dr. Paul Cote. Paul received his PhD and MA in English from the University of Maryland and a BA with distinction from University of Colorado Boulder. Paul remains at the University of Maryland, where he teaches a variety of classes based on literary and cultural studies, writing, rhetoric, media studies, creative writing, animation, and film studies. He frequently teaches seminars on Disney-themed and Disney-adjacent topics, including the Disney studio and the animation industry, cartoons on the page and on the screen, and Disney without Disney, the afterlives of children's media icons. Paul last joined us on episode 68 to discuss Disney adaptations of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and we're so glad that he could join us again for this Dickens novel as well. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you for having me back.
Thank you both so much for joining us as we wrap up this summer series. Before we kind of jump in, you've both been on with us before to talk about classic literature. So I wanted to kind of ask you both, this is something we've talked about a little bit this summer, is what do you think makes a classic, and why does a novel deserve that distinction?
I think with someone like Dickens, it's really hard because if we were reading, if there was a Disney adaptation of Henry James or Virginia Woolf or Dostoevsky, it'd be very clear, okay, this is a work that is meant to be high art. It is trying to not just entertain, but really investigate philosophically what form and what it means to be a person. And Dickens is doing that too, but Dickens is popular art. Like this was stuff that was meant to be, this was popcorn entertainment. And so the idea that we're now kind of reading Oliver Twist as if it's often literally homework is sort of fascinating because when this book was new and in serialized form, it was often looked down upon as being the equivalent of, maybe not a TikTok video, but something you'd binge on Netflix. And I think that Dickens has always sort of had that tension. Every new generation has a sort of, it's all right. Dickens is sure fun for the crowd, but it's pretty sappy, manipulative stuff, right? And yet each new generation also keeps on reclaiming and rediscovering this. And so I guess for me, what makes a classic is there something in this that after the generation that created it has come and gone, has this made us think about what it means to be a person and what it means to view the world in a way that is so distinctive and so new, that uses the form so grippingly and interestingly that we keep coming back to it and rediscovering it. And there's no way of quantifying that. It's just sort of, it happens organically almost.
I think that's well said. I would agree completely, and I'll simply add that my answer is time. That's what makes classic a classic, and it's people's reaction to the art over time that cements it as such. So, Francis Ford Coppola, the famous director, he says that his work was not credited when he was making it. He was almost fired 4 times from The Godfather, but it's time that then cements your work as a classic if the audience will receive it as such. So that's it.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It all has to do with how we observe this work, how we absorb this work, and what we have to think and say about it. I like what you added there with the over time. So we want to talk about this timeless novel. So going into some background here about Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist. I'm not going to go too much into Dickens himself. We talked a lot about him in our Christmas Carol episode. So mostly focusing on his work on Oliver Twist. So to credit some of my sources, Britannia.com, British Library Online, the Charles Dickens page online. I did go to SparkNotes. I think my English department would probably have a few words to say to me about that. And also Wikipedia. So Charles Dickens did not write Oliver Twist by accident. Like many during this time period, Dickens is foremost a social critic and uses fiction to unveil the corruption of morals and the ills of poverty during the Industrial Revolution. At 12 years old, Dickens was a child laborer himself in a blacking factory that was shoe polish. After his father and the rest of his family were sent into debtor's prison. So while supporting himself through orphanhood, an older boy named Bob Fagin helped Dickens survive during his period of juvenile employment. The hardships he witnessed and endured in this factory life motivated his writing moving forward throughout his life into several of his novels. Dickens' family recovered from their debt and he was able to return to school, which led to him to careers as a law clerk as well as a journalist. His time in journalism gave him a front row seat to the progress and perils of industrialization and the expansion of the British Empire. Dickens wrote his second novel after the adoption of the Poor Law of 1834. This English law halted government payments to the able-bodied poor unless they entered workhouses. Victorian morality valued hard work, the virtue of suffering and privation. The British government would only give aid to those who toiled for it. So you got to work for your meal. You got to prove that you deserve that income or that aid. Workhouses were purposefully miserable to deter working class people from relying on public assistance. The programs that were supposed to help the able-bodied poor gain employment, self-sufficiency, re-enter society, only confined them to poverty and continued to shame their character. Dickens used the orphan Oliver Twist, an amiable, sympathetic, and virtuous character, and his compatriots to expose the hypocrisy of Victorian Christian values and the workhouse system. Oliver Twist, alternatively titled The Parish Boy's Progress, was first published as a monthly serial, as you mentioned, Paul, from February 1837 to April of 1839 in Bentley's Miscellany magazine, with accompanying illustrations by George Cruikshank. The story was published as a 3-volume novel later on within the same time period. I had 1838, so it kind of meshed together. The serial's happening and a 3-volume novel comes out pretty much at the same time before the serial even finishes, and contains 24 steel engraved plates by Cruikshank as well. So a fully illustrated novel, which is cool. While Oliver Twist was classified as a, quote, Newgate novel, named after Newgate Prison in London for its depictions of crime, murder, poverty, and prostitution, its scandalous nature naturally deemed it a public success. Like you talked about, Paul, this was like popcorn reading. People were tuning in to get the next chapter. When criticized about his inclusion of criminals and prostitutes, Dickens replied in the preface of the library edition of Oliver Twist in 1858, quote, I saw no reason when I wrote this book why the very dregs of life, so long as their speech do not offend the ear, should not serve the purpose of a moral, at least as well as its froth and cream, end quote. So to wrap up, according to Wikipedia's documentation, this was the most complete list I could find. Since its original publication 185 years ago, Oliver Twist has been adapted at least 20 times in film, 9 times on television, 7 times on radio, and 3 times on stage. Most notable adaptations include the 1948 film starring Alec Guinness, the original Obi-Wan Kenobi, as Fagin, Oliver, with an exclamation point, the highly successful 1960 musical adaptation by Lionel Bart, whose original cast featured Ron Moody as Fagin. He would reprise that role for the 1968 Academy Award-winning film adaptation as well. And boys who alternated in the juvenile lead of The Artful Dodger included Phil Collins and Davy Jones. And Disney's 1988 animated feature film, Oliver and Company, which is going to be the topic of our conversation today, and leads us to you, Courtney, to tell us more about that film.
Sure thing. Thank you for that great in-depth overview. And I will jump right into our favorite Disney resource, Disney A to Z, which had an unexpected Blossom reference. So that was all Disney A to Z, not me when we get there, but you'll know it. So Oliver and Company film. The Oliver Twist story animated with a twist. The setting is New York, and Oliver is a kitten and Fagin the human master of a pack of pickpocket dogs. When a wealthy little girl from Fifth Avenue finds Oliver and takes him uptown to live in her mansion, Fagin's evil boss, Sykes, steps in and kidnaps the pair. His nasty plan is foiled, however, when Oliver's motley crew of dog buddies, aided by Jenny's prissy poodle Georgette, decide to use their street savoir faire in order to rescue their feline friend. Released on November 18th, 1988, directed by George Scribner, 72 minutes, with the voices of Joey Lawrence, Oliver, Billy Joel, Dodger, Cheech Marin, Tito, Richard Mulligan Einstein, Roscoe Lee Brown Francis, Dom DeLuise Fagin, Ralph Loggia as Sykes, and Bette Midler as Georgette. 12-year-old Julie Lawrence would later go on to become a teenage heartthrob on Blossom. 6 supervising animators and a team of over 3,000 artists and technicians worked for over 2.5 years to create this hand-drawn feature film in the time-honored Disney tradition. More than 1 million story sketches and drawings were required to produce the 119,275 hand-painted cells that comprised the finished film. Designers went to New York and photographed street scenes from a dog's perspective 18 inches off the ground, getting stares from passerbys, but providing excellent reference material for the layout artists. To give the background a contemporary and hard-edged look, Xerox overlays were used for the first time in this approach since 101 Dalmatians. Many of the inanimate objects in the film were created and animated on the computer: cars, cabs, buses, Sykes' limousine, Fagin's trike, part scooter and part shopping cart, a cement mixer, a sewer pipe, a spiral staircase, a piano, subway tunnels, trains, cityscapes, and even the Brooklyn Bridge. This was the first film to have its own department set up exclusively for the purpose of generating computer animation. Many different songwriters contributed to the production, including Howard Ashman and Barry Mann, Once Upon a Time in New York City, Dan Hartman and Charlie Midnight, Why Should I Worry?, Barry Manilow, Jack Feldman, and Bruce Sussman, Perfect Isn't Easy, and Dean Pitchford and Tom Snow, Streets of Gold, re-released and released on video in 1996. So that one's a very interesting overview from Disney A to Z. I feel like it gave color commentary that we don't often see, but that was straight from the source. So now that we have our source for Oliver and Company of Oliver Twist, let's jump right in there. What is everybody's previous experience with either Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist and with Oliver and Company? Emily, I will turn it over to you first.
So this is actually one where I mentioned theater. Oliver Twist has been adapted several times on stage. I have more experience with Oliver on stage. I myself have not performed in it, but my family, one of my cousins, he was very involved in local theater, his college theater, and he both played the Artful Dodger when he was a young teen, and then Fagin later as I think in his early 20s, which was really cool to see him take on both roles. And then a friend of mine in high school was also Bet in the Walnut Street Theater production in Philadelphia of Oliver. So I've seen this several times on stage, so I'm actually really familiar with the story through that format. But this is my first time reading Oliver Twist. Prior to this, Christmas Carol is the only Dickens novel I've ever read. And Oliver and Company as a film, we've talked about this a lot of several films. I know Why Should I Worry so well. It's probably in my top 5 favorite Billy Joel songs. But I knew it mostly from Disney sing-along songs, from trailers. So I have watched the film. This is one we did have in my house. It was just not one that I always picked up. But yeah, so mostly known to me on stage. Looking forward to talking more about this.
Mine was also the sing-alongs. I had a feeling you would mention that. That has been a recurring theme here. Definitely more familiar with Oliver and Company than Oliver Twist. This was my first time reading Oliver Twist. So, of course, we read A Christmas Carol, and my other Dickens experience was with Bleak House in college. And I don't know that we ever need to touch that because there's no Disney adaptation, and I'm good to not have to revisit that. But for this, it was fun to explore the light, maybe parallels between the source material and the film. I did not see the re-release in 1996, but I'm assuming that's also when my family got it on home video. And I would say Oliver and Company was one that I would put on. Maybe not, my most heavily replayed films, but not one that I would like cast off aside. Like, I don't know, we had The Jungle Book, but I didn't watch it a lot. I guess we'll unpack that someday. It's another book related one. But I would definitely put Oliver and Company on more often. The sing along songs, love me a good 30-minute sing along. Let's have a lot of fun with those. I think it was called Fun with Music. So most familiar with the two songs available there. But I would say I did enjoy watching this one as a kid, and I have memories specifically of doing so.
I remember seeing it in the cinema in 1988. The great team over at Disorder, which is another great Disney podcast, obviously did Oliver and Company as one of their episodes when they were going through all of the Disney animated films in order. And they shared that there was a bit of a rivalry between Don Bluth's The Land Before Time and Oliver and Company. And I'm sad to say that I also saw The Land Before Time before I saw Oliver and Company, but shortly thereafter, my parents did take me to see Oliver and Company. And I don't know if this is just a dream, much like the dream state that Dickens mentions twice that Oliver's in. I don't know if this is reality or a dream, but I remember quite vividly going to the cinema in 1988 and wanting to see Oliver and Company as a child, but my brother sort of refusing to see it. So one of my parents, I think it was my father, took him to see Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and my mother took me to see Oliver and Company. So that's the memory that I have. Apologies to my parents or my brother if that is not what actually happened, but that's the way I recall it. And after that, I was a fan. I didn't know anything about Billy Joel at that time. I later became a huge fan of Billy Joel, but I immediately loved the songs. I really took to, like you said, Courtney, the lightness of this film. Although I guess we'll get into this. It's kind of dark, but I didn't see the darkness when I was a child. So that's Oliver and Company. Going back a little bit to Dickens, and we'll pass it on to Paul. With my first encounter with Dickens was rather late, even though I was an English major and was really into literature when I was younger. So I didn't really come to Dickens until high school, and that was with Great Expectations. I devoured the novel and actually liked it, which is rare because usually in high school you don't really want to read the things you're assigned. But I actually really liked it. And then I liked the subsequent adaptations that I got to see of Great Expectations. It wasn't until college that I encountered him again, where I was taking a class on silent cinema. And so we did A Tale of Two Cities and were tasked with reading the novel alongside of watching the silent adaptations of that great novel, which I also loved. And then last year, inspired by your podcast and Paul's wonderful appearance on your podcast, I just devoured A Christmas Carol for the first time, and then every single adaptation I could get my hands on, including the Flintstones. So that's that's Dickens for me. I had never read Oliver Twist. I was happy to do it for this, and I'm glad I did. Paul?
Hey, okay. So I guess we'll start with Oliver and Company. Like Doug, I saw that in theaters too. It came out around Christmas time, right? So I only know this because I have one of those back in the 80s when Christmas specials would come on TV. We often tape them off TV, and we still have those little tapes. I have the commercials baked in. We watch every year, and so there are Oliver and Company commercials all over our tape from '88. Um, saw it, and it must have left some impression because I remember even like the basic outline of the plot, even as a kid. I also, it sounds like Courtney and Emily, I had the sing along video. I liked it fine. Why should I worry? Obviously, is what stands out. Um, we got the video when it came out in '96, but I would have been probably at that point. I watched it again out of curiosity, but I think I was a little older to the point where Disney films, I wasn't done with them, but I wasn't, going to watch them over and over again anymore. But as an adult, actually, my wife Rachel and I, when we were sort of getting to know each other and courting, one of our shared loves was both loving that song, "Why Should I Worry?" And when the first year we were together, I got her for her birthday. One of her presents was Oliver and Company on DVD, and it was a cute little inside joke. And then we watched it a few months later. Got to the scene, got to the song. It was great. Movie kept going, and we were both sort of like, okay, we can turn it off now. this is this is fine. So nostalgia doesn't have that much of a strong hold for me on this particular one. Dickens, I'll just be really quick with Dickens. I think I read Great Expectations, Tale of Two Cities in high school as well. I read Oliver Twist in college on a whim, just found it in a used bookstore and thought this will be fun, and gulped it right down. And then after I finished grad school, decided, what, I love Dickens. I'm just going to read all of them. And then I more or less, now I think I have, apart from the travel logs. I just, for the heck of it, went through his whole bibliography, and it's a lot of fun.
So, Paul, real quick, did you see Land Before Time first?
I don't think I saw that until it came out in video.
You
I think I
win.
saw it more. I watched it because I don't know, because Oliver and Company wasn't on video for a solid 8 years. So Land Before Time, I think, had a lot more time to worm its way into kids who only had one VHS tape to watch. I mean, I've seen it more. I think it's a more ambitious film. It's so depressing. I don't think I ever want to see that again. Oliver and Company at least is, cute. Um, so I respect Land Before Time more, but I don't know that I could sit through it again.
That's a film I have not returned to in a long time. I haven't seen Land Before Time, I think, since I was a kid. But I want to ask Paul about Charles Dickens, since this is your second time talking with us about a Dickens novel. How does Oliver Twist compare to Christmas Carol for you, kind of connecting back to our previous episode with you?
I mean, it has, I think, a similar. It's by far, after Christmas Carol, his most adapted book. I don't know that it's his most read book, because I think at this point they don't tend to assign it in high school the way Great Expectations and Tale of Two Cities gets assigned. But in terms of it's just so adaptable, and its iconic scenes are so easy to film, I think, in part, and stage, that I think it's wormed its way into our consciousness in a similar way. And it's got a similar moral outrage against hypocrisy and treatment of the poor. Um, the difference, I guess, is I have a lot of love for Oliver Twist, but it's early Dickens. It's a really messy novel, and you can kind of tell how he's making it up as it goes along, and how the second act sort of hits a lot of narrative dead ends that the movie adaptations would kind of clean up. Christmas Carol to me is the first point in which the kind of Dickens who I think it's the first fully formed, perfect, he is completely in his element novel. And then after Christmas Carol and the other Christmas stories, he'd write David Copperfield, which I think a lot of people, self included, see as his masterpiece. And everything after that, even the books that aren't quite as good, they're kind of that's his golden run. That's the equivalent of his Disney Renaissance, or his Disney in the late 1930s, early 1940s, of just everything he does, he's on a roll. Oliver Twist, you can see that brilliance in the book, but it comes in passages, and I don't think that it's fully formed, and it won't really get fully formed for a little bit.
I just wanted to add a fun fact that in reading the Penguin's Classics version of Charles Dickens, there are some appendices which are very helpful. And one of the fun facts is that one of the lines that became famous in A Christmas Carol was actually cut from Oliver Twist.
It's dead as a doornail. Which I didn't actually, because Doug, you caught that, and that's interesting. I assumed that was a common expression just because in A Christmas Carol, when he opens by saying Bob Marley was dead as a doornail, he then riffs on what a weird expression that is and how what a weird idiom that is, and does a little stand-up comedy routine before moving on with the book, which I assumed just meant that people said that back then, but maybe he coined it.
No, I think you're right that people said it, but that he wrote it in Oliver Twist, but cut it and then brings it back in A Christmas Carol. So I just thought that was a fun fact.
Little IMDb trivia here. Love it. Glad we could harken back to one of our favorite episodes. But circling back to Oliver Twist, I would love to know kind of what's our overall thoughts and impressions of the book specifically before we start comparing to the film.
Yeah, I think I maybe kind of covered this a moment ago, but I really love the book, despite knowing that it's significantly flawed. I think, especially, Dickens at a certain point clearly realizes I can only put this kid through so much torture. I'm going to pull him out of harm's way. And that's all well and good, but there's still half a book left. And so the point at which it becomes the story of all of this, the secondary family that I don't think anybody is that invested in, you can see it kind of spinning its wheels. But the scenes with the later scenes with Bill Sykes's post murder of Nancy, his run from the law, and Fagin's last night in prison, and the scenes and the early scenes in the workhouse are all just so beautifully and cuttingly rendered, and everything with the Bumbles. And I think Doug and I have talked about this a little bit too, just the way that society has moved on in some certain respects. We don't have this specific form of torturing people who don't have money or means, but we still always have some version of that. Like, the world hasn't gotten better in all respects, and the kind of moral hypocrisy of the those people who are not even that high up the social class ladder in the first place, but really get a power trip off of brutalizing the people beneath them and acting as though they're doing that out of Christian kindness and goodness, that hasn't gone away. That is it feels like it's getting worse every day. And I feel like that is why, in some ways, to go back to your earlier question, that's why the book probably has so much staying power, because we can see these hypocrites everywhere we look, even if the context has changed.
Absolutely. And just for a little context for those who aren't as familiar with the book, Mr. Bumble is a really big part of the book, although he is often cut or minimized in adaptations, specifically film adaptations. So you might not be aware if you haven't read the novel. And he is the parish beadle who later tries to flirt with Wu and then subsequently marries another very important character in the book, Miss Corney. But he loses his position as beadle upon that marriage and becomes the head of the workhouse. And there's this wonderful part that I keep talking to Paul with about where Bumble is rather sad that he no longer gets to wear the beetle outfit, which is rather regal, and it's got this really nice hat. And sometimes when they do include him in the film adaptations, you can see that outfit. But he's feeling rather sorry for himself that he no longer gets to wear this outfit. And Dickens does what Dickens does best, I think, where he just goes off in a little aside through his narration for the reader and basically says something along the lines of, it's funny, isn't it, reader, how aspects of dignity and yes, even faith often have more to do with coats and waistcoats than anything else. Basically saying that this guy's a hypocrite, right? He cares more about his clothing than he does caring for this poor little, these poor orphans or these poor children who are being overworked and underfed. So it's just a really wonderful moment. In terms of the novel overall, I want to echo what Paul said. I loved reading it. I'm so glad that I did. I do see it as ultimately flawed. I think that the whole middle section of the book isn't necessary, and that's why adaptations often cut it. So in the whole middle section of the book, Dickens kind of goes off on a tangent and gives us this whole other story. It gets rather sappy and lovey-dovey between two characters who have never been mentioned in the first half of the book. So you get a little lost, and it doesn't really pick up again until the end. And then I'll end here just by saying that I also learned from the Penguin Classics, edited by, I think his name is, let's see here. Oh, yes, Philip Horn. He indicates that he learned a lot about writing the introduction from a 1983 essay from Burton Wheeler called The Text and Plan of Oliver Twist. And that essay is amazing. It's not a long read. It's only about 18 pages, double spaced. And the reason I love that essay is because what Wheeler does is he puts forward an argument through really well researched detective work that shows how Dickens wasn't writing a novel at all, that he was making this up as he went along because somewhere along the line of the 10th chapter of his serialization, he realized that he was going to pitch to his publisher that this would become his commissioned second novel. And the publisher said, no, it's not. And Dickens, being Dickens, said, oh, yes, it is. It will be my second novel. And he was so adamant that he was going to win this fight that he actually put a section in the later serialization that said, this is a novel. So basically cementing it to the reader that I'm turning this into a novel. And again, he did win that fight and get his way. But that was sort of the beginning of the end with that publisher because they were feuding over it so heavily.
I think what both Doug, what you and Paul have touched on kind of creates my synopsis and my review of this is because of the serialization and then arguing to turn it into a novel. And Paul, what you said, how it has a lot of brilliance in passages, not necessarily as a whole. I see that a lot. And like for me, like on Goodreads, I would give this a solid 3, maybe 3.5 because of the writing. It is a compelling story. There is plot twists everywhere. There's all sorts of different characters. But a lot of that getting lost in the weeds of some side tangents. The number of characters, I went back to SparkNotes just to kind of like look at the list of characters. It's a long list. This is like Game of Thrones style list of characters, even though we're like, cool, Dodger, Oliver, Fagin, Sykes, Nancy. Like those would probably be like the top 5 I think of. But there's a whole bunch of people. Like you said, the Beetle, who often gets cut. There's so many people who tend to get cut out of adaptations. But for me, that's kind of what draws back this novel a little bit in its readability, is just like I zoned out multiple times, and like I was doing audiobook and trying to follow with my book, and I'd have to like go back 30 seconds and reread again, just because some names that, like you said, I didn't remember this person from 3 chapters ago. Oh, it's a whole new person. But then you don't see them again for another like 10 chapters. So a lot of that bouncing around. And like you said, Oliver gets put through the ringer like 3 times, almost through the same plot device. Participates in a crime, gets framed for it, didn't actually do it, gets nursed back to health by the family who wrongfully framed him. That happens twice. So I get what you're saying. Like it starts to kind of, we've seen this already. And I think that's where the adaptations have done so well of condensing a lot of those same sentiments and those problems with Oliver with a more limited number of characters. So yeah, solid like 3.5 for me. It does take a little bit of reading. I felt like a high school student again, like studying literature, having to look up passages on SparkNotes just to kind of like cement what I just read. But it was enjoyable read and really compelling of a story.
I liked that you used the word compelling, but I would also say it was convoluted. For those of you who have not listened to our entire summer series, in our last episode of Alice in Wonderland, I had a come to Jesus moment where I realized I don't really like British literature. And for that, I apologize because I am the one who picked this summer series. But here we are. And I will say, I went into this with an open mind. It's probably a 2.5 star for me because I did find it, as I said, very convoluted. Dickens is often verbose. I feel like I find that a lot in British literature. But I will say, to Dickens' credit, I cared about Oliver and I cared about his journey. I also listened to the audiobook, and I remember texting Doug I got to work like updating on where I was in reading. Doug was reading our physical copy at home, and it's one of those, like, having read a lot, I knew what was going to happen. Like, when he's at Mr. Brownlow's, this is the man who takes him in after Oliver is wrongfully accused of pickpocketing him. It's really the rest of Fagin's gang, but Oliver gets blamed. But then Mr. Brownlow is nursing him back to health, and he has an argument with another character regarding Oliver's character. Is he upstanding? The other guy's like, well, he's just going to take your money and run. Brownlow puts that to the test and wants him to return some books, give them new clothes, £5 note. And I just know, like, my heart is breaking because I'm like, oh my gosh, well, this is where he's going to get pulled back into Fagin's game. Having not read it, but kind of knowing, like, with Oliver and company, like, he gets kidnapped. I was like, I feel bad for him. Like, I did feel emotionally invested in his journey, even though I knew what was coming. I wasn't quite sure how the book was going to end because obviously Oliver and company. I quickly realized this is not a very faithful adaptation. You got some names, we'll get into it, but other than that, minor plot points. So just, it's a nature of me not really liking British literature. Sorry, y'all. But I did care, at least. So to Dickens' credit, that.
Just a quick question. I don't really spend a lot of time on Goodreads. What's the star rating out of?
5.
Out of 5.
So
okay.
Usually, if you hover over the stars, it'll say, like, I think 1 says, like, I did not like it. 2 was, it's okay. 3 was, I liked it. 4 is, I really liked it. And 5 was, it was amazing. So it was a 2 for me. It was okay. I'm not going to say I liked it. I'm not going to revisit it, but I didn't not like it.
I just wanted to pick up on your emotional reaction to that scene, and you give credit to Dickens there. And I just wanted to say that I think part of the brilliance of that scene and why we feel something in that scene is because even though he sort of becomes a lovable curmudgeon, that character is so awful in that scene where he's like, if he's good, I'll eat my hat, which is his catchphrase. And he's, oh, he's a bad one. I know it. He's a bad one. And it's just like, dude, let up. And I don't know. There's just something about that character rooting against Oliver that it pulls at your heartstrings and it makes you go, no, please don't, please don't bet against this kid. So I just think it's a brilliant moment for Dickens.
I think that leads us perfectly into talking about, like, themes and main ideas, because as a reader, you're right, we're rooting for Oliver, and that scene is a perfect example. But what Dickens, I think, is getting at theme-wise, and that's what I would talk about, what do you think Dickens wants us to get out of the story, is that outside of this novel, probably about 100%, or a good percentage, not 100%, but a good percentage of readers would probably have sided with that kid's going to steal your money and run, until they got to root for Oliver and read this in fiction. So what do you guys think he's trying to get readers to take from this story?
I will give credit to the 1983 essay that I already referenced. In that essay, Wheeler contends that at some point Dickens' purpose changes. He calls this story Oliver Twist, or The Parish Boy's Progress. That is the full title of the serialization. And at some point, Wheeler argues that Dickens becomes less interested in showing us the progress of Oliver or the parish boy, and becomes more interested in showing the reader the importance of charity to those who have less than you, even when you yourself might not have much, so that he becomes more interested in telling Nancy's story and how Nancy basically sacrifices herself for Oliver. And I just found that a very compelling argument. I don't think it is the only argument you can make. Certainly we don't have Dickens here to ask, but the way that he strings out the evidence, it seems to suggest that, yes, Dickens became less interested in taking us through the progress of Oliver, maybe because, as Paul has said, he took him through the ringer, and more interested in telling us a story about Nancy, which is why Oliver really doesn't appear very much in the last bits of the book. He's there, but very seldom. and only sort of as the evidence that you should give charity to those who need it.
So what I got out of doing some research on the background of the context of when this book was written, as well as looking at some analyses, I agree with that. Also, it's about charity because of the environment that the book is written in. So with that law, the workhouses, we talked about hypocrisy already, that I think what he's trying to do is to get people to realize that the hypocrisy of these laws and our motivations or the motivations of Victorian morality and Victorian England Christianity. And he does that in multiple ways. We go from looking at it from Oliver going through the workhouse, then we also look at Nancy. And I think overall what he's trying to get at is, maybe not judge these people so much. Like Nancy's a great ambiguous character in The Grey because she is a product of her environment. It's not outrightly stated, but it's pretty assumed that she is in prostitution. She used to be one of Fagin's pickpockets. But yet, look at the good that she does for Oliver. So yes, she lives in this life and there's problems with living in that life, but that doesn't condemn her completely as an evil person. And we have this spectrum of characters of those who are very, very good, those who are very, very not good, and then a number of people in the center who are just trying to make a living and trying to survive in the world with the hand that they're given. So I think he makes a compelling argument, and probably why he becomes so verbose is talking about that environment and how people's character is a product of that environment. But I think that's what he's trying to get from that.
I was going to say, when you said environment, the idea of maybe nature versus nurture, but also identity, because Oliver, I feel like, goes through multiple steps of uncovering his identity. He's kind of just assigned this name Twist by Bumble because that was the next letter in the alphabet. But his first name ties to his lineage, and that's how he's able to uncover his true identity. What we prescribe on identities as well, with the clothes that he wears. He's given new clothes by Mr. Brownlow, and that kind of raises his status. But then those are taken away from him. So again, this new identity is taken away. I saw that at play throughout his journey.
I guess for me, I think there are two components to the way I feel about, I think, the question in the first place. What's he trying to do? Because there are certain aspects on which we can point to things that are very clear on the surface. There's a new poor law that he's speaking out against. He wants us to think about, he's outraged at the way that orphans and the poor are treated. It's clearly on some level derived from his own childhood, working in a factory. The thing with Nancy, I don't know if we've covered this, but one of his big, it's problematic in a lot of respects, but also did some version of good. One of his big projects, a charity that he was involved with in a very, very exacting way, was this House for Fallen Women that he founded with a woman who inherited some money and wanted to put it towards some sort of good cause. It was basically a place where former sex workers and women who, for whatever reason, were outcast from society, this place would take them in. It would try to rehabilitate them and then find new lives for them. I think in some cases, finding them husbands in Australia, which again, when you put it in terms by today's standards, it sounds horrifying. But I think it is based on nobody was forced into this. And it was based on, I think, a genuine, on some level, desire to not judge these women or tell them that their lives are over, but rather try to establish that, no, you can still have a life. Like, no, you are in this position you're in because of life circumstances, and there's a way out for you. Now, the extent to which a lot of scholars and biographers look at this and think, well, there's a very good chance that Dickens was also using the services of sex workers and was perhaps guilty and trying to atone for that. There's no clear evidence for this, but I think it's one of those things that people of his class likely would have, there was a larger than zero chance it would have been a possibility. So that's where Nancy comes in. That's all the stuff that's, yes, on the surface. I think, though, for me, what Dickens intends and means is nowhere near as interesting as what the book ends up doing. Because I think part of the reason an artist like Dickens has so much lasting power is that there's the intention and there's all of this baggage that comes into the characters in places where they shouldn't be. Like, because who are the two characters when they're making a new movie version of Oliver Twist? The character that everyone always wants to play, the one they always get a celebrity for, it's Fagin. This anti-Semitic stereotype is somehow always the character that, if you're going to bring in the big guns, it's for Fagin. And then for Bill Sikes, the two villains are the most compelling parts of this story. They're the characters that get the most internal life. The only two characters that we get some degree of here's what's going on inside this person's head, and in both cases, right before they're about to die. And I think there's a large degree to which Dickens hates what these people represent, but he also sees himself in them. He relates to them more than he's really willing to acknowledge to himself. And that's the tension that makes the novel come alive, because there's the what he thinks he wants the reader to take away, and there's the what he knows and hates about himself that keeps spilling into these characters that makes them so much more compelling than they would be if this were as straightforward as just a moral parable that I think a lesser writer would have made this into.
Well said, Paul. And I just want to follow up real quick because of your mention of the characters that have subsequently become these really important figures in terms of adaptation and performance. And I felt a little bit like that reading it with Dodger, that maybe it's the performances that have come through the subsequent adaptations and the ways that those performances are praised, but also the ways the adaptations are interpreted and rewritten. Dodger becomes maybe something that he isn't in the book. And in the book, he's a very compelling character. He is very important to the narrative, but the things that happen in the subsequent adaptations do not happen to him in the book. Spoiler alert, Dodger gets arrested and, right, Paul discovered, sent off to Australia for his crimes. That doesn't happen, and I think in any of the adaptations that I've seen. So it's interesting to think about that in terms of the characters and what they've become since the writing.
Similarly, in the play, Fagin doesn't die at the end. He is what closes out, similarly to the book, he closes out the play, but he closes out of like, I just scraped by the skin of my teeth, and now I'm going to move on to a new place and continue to be the clever person that I am. So it is interesting how characters come up, and I want to talk about characters again, but something that kind of hit me reading this, thinking about like what is Charles Dickens trying to get readers to get out of this novel. I don't know if anyone's going to share the sentiment with me, but when the intriguing plot twist of Oliver's identity, did anyone else think it kind of took away from his message that it turned out Oliver was middle class, high class all along? Because I feel like if the whole message here is supposed to be like charity and whatnot, but he gets his reward, but he's from an upstanding family who had a falling out. They had his mother was disgraced. I felt like it kind of took away from, if we're trying to preach like charity, why couldn't he have just been an orphan who was in bad circumstance? Why did it have to loop around to like, surprise, here's this family?
Yeah, I think I agree. The only thing that kind of mitigates that for me is that the easy thing would have been the easy way to kind of let the reader and Oliver off the hook would have been to learn that, oh, his father and mother married in secret, and it turns out he's the legitimate heir, and instead he's still a bastard by the language they would have used in that time. And there's a scene towards the end where his half brother Monks is like that. He's like, that bastard brother of mine doesn't deserve anything. And Mr. Brownlow's like, that word has no bearing on what this child has done. The only people responsible for that being his identity are long dead and gone. And I think that for me, because he's still, by a lot of Victorian standards, socially less than because of that. And the novel does kind of make a hard stance and try to say he still gets to be the heir of this estate despite what his parents went through. It's still, I think, the wish fulfillment. The whole every orphan hopes that they are actually
they had a family
Cinderella that he's playing with. Yeah, it's definitely what he's playing with. But that's the little saving grace for me.
I don't want to make too much of it, but I think it's a great question, Emily, because I wonder if Dickens' promise in the serialization that he's going to take us through a parish boy's progress gets lessened when we find out that it's really not the boy who's progressing. It's incidents that are happening to him or for him through no progress of his own at all. So it seems to become. I think he becomes less interested in telling Oliver's story in terms of progress, and he becomes more interested in talking about these other characters in light of sort of his venue, which is London and the state of London at the time. And so, one thing that I would say for the book is that London is as big of a character as any other.
Interestingly, though, we move from London to New York City in the 1988 adaptation. So I'd like to bring us into the Disney time period here and adaptation. Let's just take a moment. I'd love to know on its own merit, what do you think of the film Oliver and Company? I know we shared our memories, but let's get a little more into our feelings.
Personally, I like this one. Again, we'll talk about it in its comparison to the book, but I think on its own, it's a fun film. It has the things you want in a Disney movie. You've got a group of characters who are fun to watch. That group of dogs, bringing in Georgette, you just have fun watching them get into their antics. There's good music. There's fun animation with those sight gags. Like, my favorite is still, of course, from Why Should I Worry? Like, when it pans to Oliver when he's a puffball after he walked over the subway vent. Like, little things like that. Like, you just get the enjoyment. It's entertaining. It has a happy ending. So, like, you get the stuff you want out of a Disney film. And like you said, Doug, earlier, I think it's also a complex Disney film in a way that like most Disney films are, like, you don't pick up on some of the darkness as a kid. You're just like, fun dogs, New York City, they jump on cars. But then as you're getting older, you're like, oh my God, Sykes like just threatened Fagin's life multiple times. It's a pretty violent film.
Violent deaths too.
Yeah.
Hit by a subway car.
Like,
usually they just fall to their death, disappear into like a cloud of dust. No, he was hit by a train.
Yeah. And his two dogs were, killed as well. Like, it's pretty in-depth. So I think it's a pretty layered film. I enjoy it. I think it's one, I don't know if I'm still going to go back to it as much as I do some other films, but I think it's a film that if people are like, what's a film I haven't watched in a while? I would tell people to watch this one.
I think for me, this is the first time that I've had the pleasure of being on the podcast where I have real nostalgia for the Disney piece we're speaking about, so that I saw it when it came out. I had the McDonald's toys. I have vivid memories about all of that, down to that as a kid, I used to put my thumb in the indent of Georgette's hair because they were finger puppets and she had like a smooth. So I used to do that to calm myself down. All of these things that I remember. So for me, and I've said this a lot to my friends and folks that know me, that I think what Disney does well is it markets and sells nostalgia. And that's what they've done here, which is why I adore this film and I always will. I think that it's flawed, and I think I'll pass it to Paul maybe to flesh that out a little bit more, because I have so much love and nostalgia for it.
It's weird because I feel like I should have nostalgia for it because I saw it. It's my third movie in a movie theater. I had all the toys and whatnot, but I guess for me, I don't know that nostalgia becomes an all-encompassing. Something has to have depth for me for the nostalgia to actually like linger, and I don't know that this one. I think it's cute. I think that Oliver and Company, on the one hand, it feels, compared to other Disney films, I feel like you can feel the budget cuts as the movie goes along. It's 60 minutes long before you count the end credits, which is like astounding to me now that that's even releasable to theaters, but I think more common at the time. All of the CGI that they're pioneering, and using the Xerox, those just read so visibly like cost-saving measures to me. There's so little movement in the environment. It doesn't help that the Disney Plus version has some really intense digital noise reduction applied to it so that much of the detail in the background is scrubbed out in order to make it seem cleaner. Um, Having said all of that, every couple of moments, there is some little bit of animated business. Oliver casually licks himself, a dog casually scratches itself, or thinking of the puffball moment. You can still tell it's being animated by some of the most talented animators in the world. And even if I don't think their script or their concept really has a lot going on beneath the surface, it's still just watching them clearly itching to use that talent and to try to find ways to show off within the limited means that they've been given, especially when you consider that apart from Don Bluth, their competition would have been, the Care Bears movie or the Transformers movie, all these cheaply animated, barely animated films that were released to theaters somehow. This is still a fully animated film. And so I feel like it is, by Disney standards, I feel like it's fairly low on the list, but compared to like most anime films released today, I'll watch this again over watching Minions 6 or the Extra Secret Life of Pets or whatnot. And I guess, think it's interesting watching it now. I'm sorry, I know I'm going a little long. It does feel like a preview of what 90s Disney will be like, and that they're really heavily advertising their celebrity voice cast. It's set in the modern world, which doesn't usually happen in those films. It's the pop soundtrack is really trying to be top 40 pop and not Tin Pan Alley. Apart from the little girl song, it's I don't think all of it always works, but it is interesting that they're trying to really lean into that, making it hip. I think it's the first Disney film that really tries to be hip.
You hit two things that I absolutely wanted to touch on, which were one, it as a precursor to the Disney Renaissance, and also the time setting of it being in the time that it was released. So on the Renaissance note, I feel like this one is often debated. Is it part of the Disney Renaissance? Because it does kick off the cycle of we are doing a film every year, basically for the next 10 years. But there's parts of it that don't quite feel fully Renaissance to me. So I think when you said it has the makings of those 90s films, I know Little Mermaid formally for most academics kicks off the Renaissance in 89, but carries us through 1999's Tarzan is where maybe not everyone draws the line, but where most people do. It has those musical moments, those big numbers, but definitely darker in tone, as both Doug and Emily addressed. But I found revisiting it just how of its time period it sometimes felt. Something I honed in on our recent rewatch to prepare for the podcast was just the presence of brands throughout, like the billboards. I mean, I get that's what you're going to see in New York City, but there was an ad for like Tab Cola, a Yamaha billboard, just little references peppered throughout that I kind of became the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's like on the couch pointing at the TV every time one of those showed up. Like, oh, there's another one.
Paul and I just devoured a book called Dickens and the Dream of Cinema by Graham Smith. And Smith does a lot of work in this book talking about Dickens' sort of depictions of the city, both London and Paris and even others. And I wonder if it's too much to say that the animators are really trying to pay attention to New York and do New York justice. I'm not saying it's Dickens. I'm not saying that they caught it. I'm just saying that like they are really trying to do New York here. Like we are seeing. I mean, it's stunning when you watch back. I mean, it really, you say that's New York. Well, that's New York of '88, right? You see it all there. So it was nice to see that, and it is there.
You mentioned, Doug, that I also re-listened to Disorder's episode on Oliver and Company to prepare for our episode here. And I thought something that was interesting that Michael Lyons said was at the time that the film was made, and when we talk about it as a contemporary piece. It was made in the time to reflect its current time. But now we can talk about it as a period piece because now that we are 40 years away from it, we can talk about it as this is what New York was in the 1980s. And that is really cool. And I do think it might be touching something on Dickens, probably more Dickens-esque than the rest of the film, how it talks about New York. But we'll get to that in a second.
I think just to follow that, I think this actually maybe touches on something that maybe I found a little, I wish there was more of in this film, in that they are trying to get New York in terms of the design. But what makes Dickens and the way he depicts cities so extraordinary, and what I think Oliver Twist is filled with, is the way with prose he makes them feel alive. Like there's so much motion in the way he depicts cities, the way he guides you. Something that the author Graham Smith kind of gets at is the way that it almost feels like he's inventing montage, the way he brings you from scene to scene, and the way he describes buildings and personifies and mixes metaphors so that it feels like London is breathing and seething, and that you're going from the slums to the nice neighborhoods and all of this stuff, and then you get to Oliver and Company, and for me it just feels like this is where the budget cuts really hurt it, because it's all of these static shots of like these streets, and the only, like, there's a point where they're in traffic and the cars aren't even moving, they're just a prop for Oliver Dodger and Oliver to jump on top of. And I think if that was the goal, the only way to make that work is there's the biggest cliche in movies is that actually in this movie, New York is the main character. But New York kind of has to be the main character in order for that parallel to connect. It doesn't have to connect, but I think that's where it feels a little emptier for me, because often literally it's just this is a backdrop and the only things moving are these animals.
I'm stealing this from Disorder, but the people don't move either, Paul. There are shots where the people just do not move.
Yeah.
Hey, we're getting used to some new computer technology. You know, it looked great in 1988. So let's transition into finally bringing these two together. I know this is where the hot takes are going to come in. How does Oliver and Company compare to Charles Dickens?
I mean, it barely does. And I was very surprised how much, having read Oliver Twist for the first time, we'll get into the individual characters specifically, but I was surprised how little there were, because we have these really distinct, lovable characters as part of Fagin's dog gang, like Einstein or Tito. I mean, like, I wasn't expecting anyone to be named Tito in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, but at least some semblance of the same character where I could draw clear parallels. I think outside of the main named characters, there are very few parallels, maybe one that we can get into. But yeah, I think obviously I knew it wasn't going to be the same exact story. Like, it's literally a cat and dog story, and it's in New York, but there were fewer parallels than I was anticipating.
I think for me, the best way to enjoy this film at all is to not think about Oliver Twist like at all, because it feels like the most 80s possible adaptation of Oliver Twist, the most Reaganomics Oliver Twist imaginable, because it does the impossible. It takes Oliver Twist and says, what if we could take Oliver Twist and remove anything resembling social commentary? What if we could just, even the very idea that poverty is something we should look at, what if we just scrubbed, is it possible? Is it possible to do Oliver Twist where we don't feel bad about the way society treats poor people, and they somehow manage to do it? So yeah, I think that it's maybe, as a cute film about a cat and some dogs, it's great. As anything, because I don't think it has to be faithful to be a good movie. I think there are so many ways of adapting. We talked about this last time with The Christmas Carol. I think you can get to the heart of something in so many roundabout ways. I don't know that I've ever seen an Oliver Twist that is so dismissive of even pretending to be about the core thing that the book is about, which is at just a basic level, society should maybe treat its least advantaged citizens better. And the film is not interested in that whatsoever.
Just going off of what Paul said, I think that Disney trying to tackle this story in whatever ways they decided to do it, and however they came from a pitch to let's do Oliver Twist with dogs to this, which is really not Oliver Twist with dogs. It's Oliver Twist as a cat who is dealing with dogs. I think that what they did in trying to restructure the story is they actually ended up making Fagin the only character who has to somehow overcome his poverty. And it's interesting that he does it through the friendship of his dogs. I mean, really, Dodger becomes his protector, his the one that really cares for him and wants to help him. And so what we see is a Sykes who is manipulating and trying to control and squeeze Fagin in Oliver and Company, which that is not the point of Oliver Twist at all. So it's completely shifted and twisted the narrative in ways that, as a kid, I did feel for Fagin, which in the book, you feel for Fagin in different ways, but Fagin ultimately is a monster.
We're going to talk about characters next, but you're right. The way they structured this story, the core characters completely shift. Fagin is the one who's down on his luck, that you're supposed to feel more sympathy towards, that he's trying to overcome his circumstance. Whereas in the book, it's Oliver. But something I found interesting when I was looking at some other materials, the making of Oliver Twist, there was a Walt Disney World Christmas Day Parade, 1988, plug for the new film, like we still see today. And they were showing like some of the clips that are similar to In the Making of feature, but then it cuts to Roy E. Disney, and he's talking about like why this is a great story. And he's like, well, the universal theme from Dickens' novel of, you know, Oliver's this orphan, everyone just wants to have a family. And I was like, that's not what the book was about at all. So it was really interesting how someone who was one of the creative directors of the Disney company talking about why the motivations of Oliver Twist, and, you know, we're taking Dickens' classic, and he tried to say this was a theme. And I was like, did you read the book? So I think we all agree that this is not faithful at all to the messaging, other than stealing some names. But I thought that was so interesting. And I linked that in the show notes. It's 6 minutes of their promotion for it on Christmas Day. And then you see the float in the parade that has all these characters on it, which is wild. But I just thought that was so interesting from Roy E. Disney.
Paul did joke with me, and it's a joke because we don't know, but Paul did joke with me. Did any executive at Walt Disney read this book before signing off on this movie?
No, they spent all their money on the tagline, "It's a new twist on Oliver Twist." And they're like, yeah, that works. That sounds good.
Twist is the right word for this. It is a very far twist from what it was originally.
I did read in that book Disney Lore, but apparently when they pitched Oliver and Company as, what about Oliver Twist with dogs? The reason that it got the green light is because Jeffrey Katzenberg, I don't know how this can be true, but that's what the book says. Jeffrey Katzenberg, in his previous job, had really wanted to make a movie version, or produce a movie version of Oliver the musical. Now, one might say there already is a movie of Oliver the musical. It did quite well for himself. It would have only been, 15-ish years old. But I guess he heard Oliver and dogs and thought, oh, this can be how I make Oliver. And somehow this movie was the result of that.
Fair enough, because I do feel that the characters that are most dominant in Oliver the Musical are the characters that make its way into Oliver and Company. So let's talk about some of those. We have Oliver, Fagin, Dodger, Sykes, and I think we might even be able to argue that there is a Nancy equivalent in Oliver and Company. So I will open it up here. We can discuss all of them at once, whatever you want to do. Emily, go ahead.
I want to bring back something Doug said earlier, that I think what makes Dodger such an interesting character and Fagin such an interesting character is over time through these adaptations, how people have portrayed them. Because the first character I think of in Oliver is the Artful Dodger. I think he's one that people are fascinated by. He's this young, scrappy kid who dresses and talks like a gentleman. He's got 2 songs in the play. So for me, he was always my favorite character, at least as a kid, until I kind of got to know Nancy a little bit more, because I always thought he was so much fun. And they do that in Oliver and Company. He is the main character, even though it's about Oliver. This kitten, it's really about Oliver and Dodger's bond, which doesn't really exist in the book. We get the initial founding where like Dodger takes him under his wing, but really he's trying to use Oliver for his own gain to get more sausages, which we see in the book. He's going to use Oliver, and he's happy to let Oliver take the fall for stealing the books, for pickpocketing, the man at the bookstore. But that's really only about the only connection we get between Oliver and Dodger in the film, or in the book. In the film, it's really about how they're growing friendship. They're both, trying to protect the families they both love while also looking out for each other. Their families come together in the end. So he's cool. I think a lot of these characters, they get the personality where like Dodger's really cool. Oliver's completely naive and innocent to the world of how it actually exists. But yeah, ultimately they become the center, whereas they are not the main characters in the book at all.
Great points, Emily. The narrative from the book to Disney's attempt to adapt it is completely changed to the point where we get really Fagin is now, if anything, the poor person that we're supposed to feel for, where Oliver is a kitty who wants to stay with Jenny, the little girl who has found him. So that's just not the book. I will say that Sykes interests me because, I already mentioned that Fagin in Dickens is a monster. He's a complicated monster who often we need to question why we see him as a monster, and it's very complicated. And Dickens was so distraught by his anti-Semitic depiction of Fagin that in the last volume that he edited before his death, he scrapped most of the descriptions of Fagin as, quote, the Jew, unquote, and replaced it with Fagin. And one of the last chapters of Oliver and Twist is called The Jew's Last Night, and he changed that to Fagin's Last Night. He was listening to people's dissent about his depiction, his anti-Semitic depiction. That doesn't absolve him, and I don't mean to suggest that it does. But so Sykes interests me because Sykes is a big bad in the book. Now, he is also a victim of his circumstances, but he is relentlessly abusive, violent. That is Sykes' tendency in the book. And I think that the film tries to take that up. I mean, there's a moment where we have no idea what he's talking about, but Sykes is on the phone with somebody and he's talking about how to kill him. Like, this is a kid's movie. So, like, what are we, like, this has nothing to do with Fagin or what he's threatened Fagin with. This is just, this has nothing to do with the narrative of this movie, but Sykes is on the phone saying, yeah, this is how you got to kill this guy. He talks about putting him in cement shoes. So I feel like while Sykes is clearly not the Sykes from the book, they are trying to do something with Sykes as the big bad. And it's really interesting to me to look at that character. I also, stealing from Disorder again, kudos to them over there. But I found out from listening to that podcast that Marlon Brando was supposed to voice Sykes. And I just find that fascinating. And I kind of wish it had happened, but it didn't. So there we go.
I'm glad you touched on Sykes because that was one that I wanted to take. I did feel, while it's not a literal translation of the character from the book, that felt the most consistent to me was going to be my point as well. Like, if you're mapping out, all right, who feels most like their inspiration from the book? Very obviously the main villain. I liked that you called him the big baddie.
So I'm going to try to make a thread here between the Dickens novel to Fagin and Sykes. Maybe Disney had a little thread. Maybe someone, down the line read the book. But something that I think, kind of reflecting on our talks about like morals and what Dickens was trying to show, I think how they're both portrayed as criminals kind of works. Or at least a little bit of the hypocrisy, like that theme here. So like Sykes is in the film anyway, he seems well off. He dresses in a nice suit. He has the car. He looks like a quote, upstanding member of society by appearance. But at the core, like you said, we have a lot of evidence that he is not a good person. I think that kind of connects to Dickens in a way of, we look at Beetle, we look at all of these characters who are supposed to be the moral backbone of London who aren't. They look good, but they're not good people. So maybe that is there. And then kind of connecting to Fagin, the characterization of being a villain versus the sympathetic character is off, but their styles of crime, I think, are about the same. Like Fagin in the book, he gets other people to do things for him. He is not a violent person. He has violent tendencies, but then manipulates other people to do it. He raises a pack of pickpockets. It's a lot of minor, less violent crime that adds up over time, whereas Sykes, he's like, we're going to go rob a house, and I'm going to take a little kid, and I'll threaten him with a gun if he doesn't do it. So, like, their styles, I think, are similar in the sense of, like, how are they going to work through this life? Fagin he's got to lie, cheat, and steal still in Oliver and Company, but he tries to do it in the least violent way. Again, I'm making a stretch here, but I can see where maybe we have a little tiny speck salt on the popcorn connection.
I think there's an idea there that I like, that I now wish the film had done more with, because I think there's potential for the Sykes of the Disney film not to be like the Sykes of the novel, but to at least be, if we saw him as this upstanding business, community, like someone who if we saw him outside of the Fagin scenes, we saw that he was respected in ways that Fagin wasn't, I think that might actually, there's potential to comment on the kind of 80s American Psycho world that's taking place around this. Doug mentioned that there's a character in a quick passing shot that kind of looks like Patrick Bateman. But as it stands, he's kind of depicted as like this one-man mafia who we only ever see him alone with he has 2 dog hitmen. That's it. That's his entire operation. He's talking to somebody on the phone, but he doesn't have any enforcers. He does all of his own grunt work. He doesn't have anyone involved in kidnapping this child, which seems to be a pretty big operation. What I do kind of like about this is that the subway chase, I think, is really well done. I think it's a really well executed, action set piece, and it does something similar to one of my favorite Disney films, which comes right before this, Great Mouse Detective, in which I think they both have this like kind of chilling climax where the villain, who has up until this point been kind of masquerading as, a gentleman aristocrat, finally is kind of pushed. He doesn't get what he wants, and the sort of animal inside bursts out. And for Radigan's sake, he starts tearing off his clothes and he becomes the rat that he's always like declares he isn't. And in Fagin's case, like the subway, once the car gets onto the subway and the tires rip off and he just starts destroying his car, which has been this big symbol of his power over the course of the film. Like, he smashes the window and he smashes the windshield. So he keeps on like every kind of visual signifier of his prestige he destroys in order to get this girl, and becomes like the sort of bestial character that he's been pretending he isn't. I find that compelling. I find it almost like an inverse of Oliver Twist, because Sykes in the novel is basically this feral animal until he kills Nancy, and then he doesn't become sympathetic per se, but he becomes human at least, in that you realize, oh, he feels guilt. He feels things. He is running from his conscience. He deserves what he's going to get, but for the first time we're inside his head, and the novel seems to recognize his humanity. even as it also knows what needs to happen to him. So I feel like there's a flip in that respect.
Absolutely. One thing that I wanted to circle back to with Fagin is and again, sorry, spoilers if you have not yet read the book, but in Oliver Twist, it's really interesting that Fagin has this moment where he actually gets rather excited in contemplating a plot in his own head that he has figured out a way to get rid of Sykes. Um, and what he realizes is that because he is more intuitive than Sykes, he just seems to witness the world in a different way than Sykes does. He notices that Nancy is not behaving the way that she normally did, and so that she must be doing something. And he thinks that she's sort of running around behind Sykes's back, and he thinks that he can use this to get Nancy to actually kill Sykes. Um, and he's like, yes, I'm going to manipulate Nancy to kill this guy who's kind of always on my back, who's this animalistic guy who always marches in here and demands his money. And, he's supposed to be my partner, and I'm going to do away with him. And then he is horrified to find out that Nancy is not just running around on Sykes, but Nancy is actually informing on Sykes in a way that could implicate him. And so then he realizes he has to manipulate Sykes to kill Nancy. So it's this really dark moment in the book where you go, oh my goodness. Yes, Emily, you're right that he does not commit the violence himself, but he is extremely violent and that he knows how to manipulate people to do it for him. And that's why I say he's a monster. And it's this really weird, sort of moment where you go, he was going to kill Sykes, but now he has to kill Nancy. And it's kind of his darkest moment, and sort of cements his villainy.
I'm glad you brought up Nancy. So she's so integral to the book. And like I said earlier, she is kind of the spectrum of characters. We have all these characters who are very good, characters who are very bad, and she's this one in the middle that we can't really decide where she falls. But does Oliver and Company have a Nancy? Is Jenny Nancy?
I would say probably not. And I think I get it. I don't know that Disney wanted to have a scene where, Sykes beats a dog to death, in order to maintain that fidelity.
I was going to say, I feel like Jenny is more Rose than Nancy. So Rose is revealed to be Oliver's aunt after they've already had this connection without knowing that relationship. She is more a caretaker in that regard. So I see the thread to Rose through Jenny more so than Nancy.
That was the argument I was going to make as well. She's kind of Jenny is kind of combined the Barnlow family and Rose and Oliver's actual family. She's kind of taking that role on of bringing Oliver out of his circumstance and caring for him and being the family he's always wanted. So yeah, I saw her more as a Rose than a Nancy, but it does break my heart that there's not really a Nancy in this because she's such an interesting character to me.
So allow me to unbreak your heart, Emily. So when we, Courtney and I were rewatching Oliver and Company, I said, what is Georgette doing in this movie? And then I realized what Georgette was doing in this movie. So Georgette helps the gang kidnap Oliver. So in whatever loose way, she is the film's Nancy. Now, does it do it justice? No, as Paul already said, we don't have these moments that we need. But the Georgette is the film's Nancy. If you want to do that, if you want to try to say who is this and who is this, I think when you do that, you start to realize why the film fails as an adaptation of Dickens. I don't think the film fails. I think through nostalgia, I still will watch it and like it. But it is not a good adaptation of Dickens because it doesn't have Bumble. It doesn't have a clear Nancy. But if you really want to try to map it, Georgette is the Nancy because she is the one who is the catalyst for helping get Oliver back in his trouble. And that's really the key point of the book.
I believe you also said she's a little bit of Noah Claypool as a rival to Oliver when he first arrives.
She is. She's the only possible connection we have to Noah Claypool, who is the is the character I hate the most in the book. But that is a compliment to Dickens. I don't think Dickens wants any of us to like Noah Claypool. So I'm not saying that I hate him because of Dickens. I'm saying that I hate him because Dickens is a great writer. So Noah Claypool is a younger character who bullies Oliver as he gets taken out of the workhouse for asking for more food. He has the audacity. Actually, he doesn't even have the audacity. He draws straws with the other orphans and ends up short. So he is forced to ask the workhouse for more food, and as a result is outcast. And they then offer anyone who will take him £5. So they pay someone else to take him on just because he had the audacity to ask for more food. And so he ends up working for
The Undertaker.
Yes, thank you so much. The Undertaker. And as a result, he meets Noah Claypool, who is an awful character who bullies him. And it's one of the more proud moments we have for Oliver in the book, because Noah Claypool criticizes his mother, and little Oliver, I think he's 9 years old at the time, is not having it, and he pounces Noah, who's quite a bit older than him, and just pummels him. It's kind of like in A Christmas Story where little Ralphie just beats the heck out of the bully. So anyway, there's this wonderful moment, but that's the last we see of Noah Claypool until the end of the book, when he comes back, and then Dickens brings him back, and we're like, why are you back in this story, Noah Claypool? So yeah, Noah Claypool comes back around, and then we have to watch him get his comeuppance.
So I think we can all agree, I think, from this discussion, that while Oliver and Company itself has its merits as a film detached from Dickens, for most of us here being teachers, we are not going to tell our students, if you're looking for a shortcut in reading Oliver Twist, do not watch the Disney adaptation. You're not going to get you're not going to do well on that quiz or on that essay if you try to write an Oliver Twist based off of Disney.
You'd be better served by the Wishbone adaptation at that point.
Actually, Paul, I wanted to ask you, because you and I have talked a lot about the adaptations that we've had a chance to engage with. What would you say is the definitive adaptation, or are you like, I haven't found one yet?
The David Lean one comes closest, I think. And I think the book that you turned me to, Dickens and Dream of Cinema, which I thought was great, makes a really strong case for how Lean in that film, using cinematography and editing and just lighting and set design, tries to recreate the sense of space and place that Dickens creates in prose through cinema. There's a fairly recent BBC adaptation that I wasn't sold on when I first started watching it, but it grew on me as I got into it, from 2007, 2008, with Timothy Spall as Fagin. That is a great, like, off-brand Oliver Twist in that it follows the basic story, but it adds different wrinkles that Dickens wouldn't have thought of. And I think the most compelling being, it makes Fagin, he's Jewish still, but his Jewish faith is actually an important part of his character, and it gives him like a nuance. Like at the end of that, this is spoiler alert, I guess. The end of that miniseries, when Fagin is brought to trial and he's sentenced, the judge says, I am willing to grant you mercy if you repent and beg Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And Fagin is crestfallen but refuses to, because his faith is important to him. And I think that adaptation, I think if you want like here is an interesting way of taking the story and thinking of it in new ways, I like that one a lot. If you want something close to the novel in terms of the way it feels and the way it's built, I think David Lean's comes the closest. I don't think any of them have really captured Dickens' tone fully, because I think as I'm not the first person to note this, but so much of Dickens' humor is from his narrator's voice. And if you don't have that in the film and you don't have some way of replicating it, then you lose a lot of what makes this more than just 400 pages of misery. Like the humor, I think, is what makes those early scenes readable and not just misery. Word I probably shouldn't use in a Disney podcast. Um, And I don't know if there's an easy way to do that apart from just adding a narrator, but I do feel like most adaptations are afraid to acknowledge Dickens is also funny. I think it's why the Beetle, Mr. Bumble, is always minimized because he is a Monty Python character, and it seems like every time there's a movie version, nobody wants to acknowledge that this is actually also a comedy, in addition to being a social critique.
I completely agree with you, and what the three of you did so well in the other Dickens episode that you were all on is you established that the reason why the Muppets Christmas Carol is so good is because it has that narrator in Gonzo.
So I think to wrap up this very robust discussion of Oliver and Company, I just want to think about, like, what is the legacy of Oliver and Company? We know Dickens' novel lives on as a classic film, but is this a classic Disney film? Should it be remade into a live action? Should it be in theme parks? Like, what is the legacy of Oliver and Company from 1988 as it turns 35?
I think for me, and I maybe already kind of touched on this, I think it's interesting as a transitional film. I think in terms of it being, even though there are ways in which it feels like Disney is in some ways trying to imitate what Don Bluth had been doing, down to getting Don DeLuise as a voice actor, it feels like it's Disney shifting into, okay, we want to be hip and we don't want to just imitate what we did when Walt Disney was alive. And even if I don't think they really fully commit to the bit yet, I do think that it's worth as a kind of preview of the sort of the kind of animated films that I think really take shape with DreamWorks and Shrek, where the voice cast is the main attraction. This kind of does that before that becomes a big thing. It also has at least one absolute bop. Why Should I Worry is an amazing song. It's the lyrics. Don't pay attention to them because they're barely lyrics, but the music is just so great. I think that they should at least capitalize on that. I would be so horrified if they made this into a live action film with photorealistic Oliver and company. I really hope that never happens. But 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 sure, bring it back into the parks. Make that song. If there's a little one of those things where they do a little show in front of the castle where there's a guy in a Dodger costume singing Why Should I Worry? Sure, that'd be fun. Why not?
I agree with you that there should definitely not be a live action film. I'm not going to go on my tangent about Disney remaking animated films into live action. I think for me, how I think it should live on, I don't know if I see a specific place for it in the parks, but I think it's got a lot of potential in merch. Like how Loungeflies and other vendors have really started digging back to some films that don't get a lot of appreciation in like theme parks and whatnot. And like you can get that t-shirt, like a t-shirt with like the vintage poster like art on it. I would love that for Oliver and Company. Like I think things like that work really well. A pin set collection that I'm collecting, the supporting cast, I think that would be a great pin. So those little places where you can give that throwback, sell the nostalgia, quite literally sell the nostalgia, I think is where it works. But I do think it's a great film for that transition period. We should give this film the credit it deserves for bringing us into the Renaissance. But I don't know if I really want Disney to retouch it from where it is.
As a Disney pin collector myself, I know that they often will put Oliver in any cat series that they do, and they'll put Dodger in any dog series that they do. And they've done really at least 3 that I know of great ornaments. They'll release Christmas ornaments and they're sold year round. And I have one of Dodger because I really like Billy Joel. So those continue to, I think, to come out, and that's nice. I think in terms of the legacy of Oliver and Company, I think that it should, we watched a special feature on the Blu-ray, which I'm sure is on the DVD as well. And I feel like they spun it. They spun a story that wasn't there, and the story that they spun was that they knew that this was the birth of something new for Disney, and that this was gonna take off, a new renaissance for the company. While I think that that's fake, that they didn't know that this was going to do what they wanted it to do, and perhaps maybe it only made money because the executives kept it in theaters long enough for it to make money. I don't know. I don't know those histories. But what I'm saying is that I think the movie needs to be reevaluated as something that kicked off these animators creating some of the greatest cinema that will live on forever. So maybe this movie isn't that, but it did kick off that. It kicked off what came next, and we all know what came next. Little Mermaid, um, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King. These films that will forever go down in history as some of the best that were ever made. So I think it deserves that legacy.
Can I retract my earlier point? I actually do think it needs a live action remake. But I want it to be as gritty as humanly possible. I want it to be like David Lynch's Oliver and Company. Or alternatively, I want Julie Taymor to do Oliver and Company, but using like avant-garde puppets, like her Lion King Broadway show. If you can do that, I'm all on board. If it's like the weirdest, most avant-garde Oliver and Company, sign me up.
The
Money in the
Muppets, Oliver and
Bank. Bill
Company.
them up. No, leave them
No,
out of it.
I
Let them remain unbesmirched by what I have in mind for this Oliver and Company.
I love it. Perhaps a future resource, but all great points regarding the legacy of this film, a great discussion overall. I think when we first started watching the film, reading the book, I was like, I don't know what all we're going to talk about, but you all have been wonderful contributors to this discussion. As always, we like to close out and leave our listeners with various resources, additional information that they can seek out if they enjoyed this. So mine has been mentioned, though it is the Oliver and Company bonus features. We own the Blu-ray, and I did confirm they were the same on the DVD. And Emily mentioned that the Making of Oliver and Company featurette that was on my Blu-ray is also available on Disney Plus. So be sure to check the extras section on Disney Plus. The Blu-ray also featured the 1988 trailer and the 1996 reissue, so it was fun to see how those were framed.
some resources I want to point out. If you are looking for an adaptation that's closer than watching Oliver and Company, I do love the musical. I get it. I said my experience with it, seeing it multiple times in theaters, but I think the music is great. If you're a musical theater fan, it hits all the beats that you want from a very classically made Broadway musical. It has some great numbers in there, and Nancy's ballad, As Long as He Needs Me, is gorgeous. So I highly recommend that. Consider yourself I Do Anything. So fun. And that's what's going to make you fall in love with Dodger. And if you can see the show, go see it. And if you are trying to cheat for your English exam, watch the play, not Oliver and Company. And I did want to mention that in the show notes, I threw in the 1988 Christmas Day Parade clip that I mentioned earlier with that small talk with Roy E. Disney and other animators about the film. So it's similar to the Blu-ray features, but it concludes with a float that goes down Main Street USA with Dodger, Oliver, Jenny, Georgette, and Tito and Francis in full character on that float. The dogs are bigger than Jenny. It's a weird thing kind of to watch, but it's also adorable at the same time. There's choreography to Billy Joel's music. So go take a watch for that. I think it's really fun.
One thing that I didn't get to mention was, which I highly recommend to listeners, is a new book by Nick Hornby. It's called Dickens and Prince, A Particular Kind of Genius. And believe it or not, Nick Hornby, the author of High Fidelity, About a Boy, and other very popular novels that were then turned into films, he's able to draw a comparison between Dickens and the phenomenal music legend Prince, who we lost not too long ago. and it's just, if you wonder how on earth Disney was able to turn this Dickens classic into a pop musical in the 80s, then read Dickens and Prince, because I think you'll find a wonderful comparison between Dickens and a pop icon. Also, of course, I've mentioned it several times, Disorder, the episode on Oliver and Company, check that out. And finally, the article that I mentioned several times, Burton M. Wheeler's The Text and Plan of Oliver Twist from 1983.
I'll second all of those, Rex. Emily, I'm also a big fan of Oliver the musical, and I think the movie version is if you want like an Oliver Twist that is mostly fun, it's not necessarily. Even though I said earlier that most versions of Oliver Twist forget that it's a comedy, Oliver almost goes in the other direction. It's so upbeat that you almost forget. I guess these aren't orphans, but it's also really fun. It's just like, and the movie has so many huge sound stages on all these big Mary Poppins-esque sequences. It's really a trip. Um, we mentioned it earlier, but Dickens and the Dream of Cinema by Graham Smith, which Doug actually found, I thought was a really wonderful critical analysis in a way of trying to show. Basically, it argues that the way Dickens thought about images and movement and the way he wrote kind of provided a template for the way the first movie makers developed how movies got made. And so, like, if you read Dickens, you actually kind of see